I booked a room for Friday. His name's Colin. He'll be there by 8. That was the first sentence she said after 20 minutes of silence. No build-up. No hesitation. Just those words, like she was telling me she'd ordered takeout. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the dark patch of condensation on my glass of water, wondering if I'd misheard her. But she kept going. It's just one night. That's all I want. One night to feel something that isn't this. This meaning me, I guess. My tongue felt like concrete. My lips moved before my brain did. You're serious. She nodded. Not a guilty nod. A confident one. Like she had decided on a new brand of shampoo and wanted me to be impressed by her boldness. Why are you telling me? I asked. And I'll never forget what she said. Because I respect you. Respect. She said that while asking for permission to cheat on me. Like the two things could exist in the same sentence without imploding. I stood up too fast, knocking my knee against the table leg. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I didn't even cry. That would come later, in a locked bathroom with the faucet running. But at that moment I was calm, quiet, hollowed out. And then I gave her two choices. Not threats, not ultimatums, just options. Okay, I said, voice low. Option 1. You go to that hotel, and when you come back, your key won't work. The locks will be changed. No conversación. No cloche. You'll come home to absence. That's what you'll get. Option 2. You cancel the reservation. You stay, and you never bring his name into this house again. But if you stay, you fight for us, not for some fantasy you think smells better than reality. She blinked. That threw her off. I don't think she expected logic. I don't think she expected choices. I think she wanted a scene, yelling, pleading, emotional chaos that she could blame on me later. But I didn't give her that. I gave her a mirror. She left the room without saying a word. I heard her phone buzzing upstairs. She didn't choose option 1 or option 2. She was planning something else. And what she did the next day, it made both of my options look like games. The next morning, the scent of her perfume hit me before I even opened my eyes. Not the one she usually wore. This was new, spicier, bolder. A scent chosen for someone who didn't already know her scent. That told me everything. I walked downstairs expecting to find her gone. But there she was, standing in the kitchen, dressed like she was headed to an event I wasn't invited to. Dark blouse, leather jacket, high heels that clicked like exclamation points on the tile. She didn't look guilty. She looked cinematic. I leaned against the wall and watched her pour herself coffee like it was a normal day. I waited for her to speak first. She didn't, so I did. You made a decision? I asked, even though I already knew. She didn't look up. I'm going. No epalegi. No hesitation. Just that. I nodded slowly. Then I guess this is it. And here's the part that hit harder than anything else. She smiled. Not cruelly, not mockingly, but as if I just finally passed some kind of test she had silently set up. Like I was finally reacting the way she wanted me to. She took a sip of coffee, set the mug down, and casually grabbed her purse. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, she said over her shoulder. Harder? I hadn't even begun to make it hard. She left at 9:32 a.m. By 10 o'clock, I had already driven to a storage unit and pulled out a suitcase that hadn't been touched in 5 years. By 10:15, I had emptied the contents of her closet, every last blouse, dress, shoe, and lipstick, into donation bags. Here, Diem Bay. Gone. Her framed diploma that she insisted hang in the hallway, face down on the lawn. I didn't do it in rage. I did in silence. Mechanical, like I was watching someone else clean up the scene of a party they hadn't been invited to. By 11 a.m., I had texted her 2 words, don't return. No threats. No please. Just a boundary. She didn't respond. Not for hours. But at 6:47 p.m., she finally did. Her message said, Lowell, don't be dramatic. I'll be back in the morning. This changes nothing. Nothing. That word broke me in a way I didn't expect. After everything, the confession, the hotel, the bold departure, she still believed she could come back like it was a long errand. But here's the thing. She didn't know what I knew. She didn't know that earlier that day, while dropping off her things, I'd found something tucked between the pages of an old recipe book she never used. A receipt. Not from a hotel, but from a jewelry store. A custom men's bracelet. Engraved. It wasn't for me. So that night, I made my own reservation. Not at a hotel. At the house of someone she never expected I'd go to. Someone who knew her better than she realized. And that visit, that conversation, it would be the unraveling of everything. Because Raina's fantasy night was never the real betrayal. The real betrayal started long before. I was about to find out how far back it went. I didn't go to a hotel. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't sit in the dark with a glass of whiskey and whisper to the walls like a man in a cheap drama. Instead, I went to someone Raina never thought I'd turn to. Her half-brother, Graham. Graham and I were never close. He was 6 years younger, lived across town, and always gave off that vague tech startup energy that made you wonder if he had any real job. Raina said he was flaky, immature, unreliable. She often called him, like she'd rehearsed the word until it sounded like a warning. But when I showed up at his apartment unannounced that evening and told him I needed to talk about her, his entire face changed. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't say, "Why are you here?" He just exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a year and finally had permission to let it go. "I was wondering when this would happen," he muttered. Those 7 words rearranged the floor beneath me. He made us coffee. We sat on his cluttered balcony, surrounded by dusty succulents and 2 broken bicycles. And then Graham told me something that made the hotel room seem like a childish mistake in comparison. "You think this is the first guy?" he said. "It's not. Lowell, there have been others." I didn't speak. I just stared at the coffee I suddenly didn't want. "She's careful," he continued, "but she's not as smart as she thinks. I saw her 2 years ago at a gallery opening. Not with you." I didn't say anything because I figured it was none of my business. But then it happened again, and again. "Why didn't you warn me?" I asked. He shook his head. "Because every time I thought about telling you, she'd show up at my place with wine, acting all sweet and sisterly, guilt-tripping me, telling me how fragile you were, how you were already paranoid, and how telling you would destroy your mental health. She made me feel like the villain." That hit harder than I expected. Not just because she'd lied, but because she'd used me as a reason to protect herself. She painted me as weak, unstable, pitiful. I left Graham's place around midnight. I don't remember most of the drive. Just flashes, the blur of headlights, the green glow of gas station signs, a raccoon darting across the road like it was in a hurry to escape its own problems. When I got home, the house felt different. Not emptier, but colder, like it knew something had shifted. She hadn't come back yet. Good. I walked upstairs, turned on my laptop, and opened the folder I thought I'd never need again. Documents for when it all ends. I'd created it 3 years ago after a fight we never truly resolved. It had legal forms, backup account passwords, scanned receipts, all the bones of a quiet exit strategy. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning a disappearance. She wanted one night? Fine. She could have it. But when she came back, she would be returning to a home where her husband no longer lived. Not physically, not legally, not emotionally. What I didn't know then, what no folder, no conversation, no Google search could prepare me for, was what Raina was about to bring back from that hotel. Because her betrayal wasn't just personal. It was professional. And I wasn't just her husband anymore. I was her liability. By the time I woke up the next morning, the bed beside me was still empty, the sheets undisturbed. Crisco lay curled at my feet, unaware that our lives were unraveling like bad stitching in an old coat. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. I knew there'd be no apology, no explanation, no voice message filled with regret. She wasn't coming back the same, and I wasn't going to be here to greet her when she did. But before I disappeared, there was one thing I needed to understand. Why did she feel so invincible? Raina had always been smart, sure, strategic, but what Graham told me about how casually she'd been weaving infidelity into our timeline made no sense without one missing piece. She wasn't just emotionally detached. She was reckless. Or worse, she thought she was untouchable. That's when I remembered something. A conversation from years ago. We were still happy then, or at least pretending well enough to fool ourselves. She was drinking wine on our porch, barefoot and philosophical, and she said something odd. "I make sure I never rely on anyone. That way, I'm never really trapped." At the time, I thought it was empowering. Now it felt more like a confession. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the shared cloud account we hadn't used in years. It was supposed to be our house documents folder, bills, loan paperwork, car repairs. But Raina never deleted anything. She just renamed folders and hoped I'd never look too close. There it was, a subfolder titled Old Client Files, Archive. Inside were spreadsheets, dozens of them. But one caught my eye. It was labeled simply, LT19_batch. I clicked and froze. It wasn't work-related. It was a ledger, one with names, dates, amounts, and initials. Not customers, not commissions, transfers. From my accounts, buried in financial jargon and confusing memos, I started to see a pattern. Small transfers over the course of 2 years, always under the radar. She'd been bleeding money from our joint investments, carefully, methodically, into what looked like a brokerage account I didn't recognize. I cross-referenced the routing number. It didn't belong to her. It belonged to someone named Colin M. Stratton. Colin. The man she claimed was just a one-night curiosity. She wasn't cheating with a stranger. She was funding him. I sat back in the chair, every nerve in my body tightening like piano wire. Raina wasn't just betraying me romantically. She had been laundering money from our accounts to support another man. A man who, I realized now, probably didn't even love her. He loved what she could give him. And maybe she knew that. Maybe that was the sick part. Maybe it made her feel powerful. By noon, I had printed every document, snapped photos of every screen, and backed it all up onto a flash drive labeled with one word: exit. I booked a one-way ticket to Seattle. I didn't have a plan yet. Just distance. I needed distance. But before I left, I did something petty. No, not petty. Necessary. I changed all the passwords she thought she still had access to. The shared savings. The brokerage. The emergency fund that I had contributed to every month for a decade. All of it was locked down. She wanted freedom? Let's see how she handled it without a parachute. At 5:47 p.m., just as I was grabbing my bag, I heard the door open downstairs. Crisco barked once, then went quiet. And then I heard her voice. But she wasn't alone. There were 2 sets of footsteps, and one of them was not Colin's. I froze halfway down the stairs. The door had barely clicked shut, and I could already hear her heels on the tile. Then another sound, not Colin's. Heavier steps, slower, familiar in a way that made my skin crawl before my brain even caught up. I peeked around the corner and saw them standing in the entryway. Raina and my former business partner, Trent Halvorson, the man I co-founded an online consulting firm with 6 years ago. The man who ghosted me after our first big acquisition, walking away with a padded buyout and a promise to never compete. The man I hadn't seen in almost 2 years. He was standing in my house, next to my wife, with that same condescending smirk he used to wear in boardrooms when he was about to screw someone over. But this time, he wasn't looking at client. He was looking at me. Raina noticed me on the stairs, but she didn't flinch. "Lowell," she said coolly, as if she hadn't just been out all night with another man. "You're home." "Not for long," I replied. My suitcase was already zipped and waiting by the door. Trent stepped forward like he owned the place. "We need to talk." "No," I said immediately. "You need to leave." He chuckled. "Not yet. This concerns you." And that's when Raina pulled the real trigger. She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder. Yellow, slightly creased. She held it like it was radioactive. "I thought it was better you heard it from both of us," she said, and her voice dropped into that rehearsed, almost pitying tone she used when talking to clients who couldn't afford the listing she sold. Trent opened the folder and laid it out on the hallway table like some twisted show and tell. A stack of documents, contracts, account statements, and on top, a proposal with both their signatures. They were launching a new company. Not just any company, a competitor, built on the same infrastructure I had developed with Trent years ago. Same model, same demographic targeting, even the same design language in the branding mock-ups. Raina, it turned out, had been feeding Trent the back-end architecture. The exact specs I'd spent months designing. She had full access through her home system, our backups, everything. She had weaponized our marriage into industrial theft. "You're stealing from me," I said, numb. "It's not stealing," Raina replied. It's pivoting. You've been wasting your talent doing nothing with that old code. You said yourself you were tired of the industry. I was tired of the politics, I snapped. Not the work. Trent stepped in. Look, we can make this painless. We're offering you a percentage. A silent partner arrangement. You walk away now, clean, and we'll keep you in the background with a nice payout. No losots. No hard feelings. I stared at them, both of them, and something inside me began to boil in a way it hadn't in years. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Just a shift. A quiet clarity. These people weren't my enemies because they were evil. They were my enemies because they thought I was harmless. Because I didn't shout. Because I didn't punch walls. Because I processed betrayal with silence. They thought I'd never bite back. And they were about to learn how wrong they were. I didn't respond. I didn't threaten. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, small and honest. Then I picked up my suitcase, walked out the front door, let it close behind me like a guillotine. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I had already sent copies of those same back-end systems to an independent auditor the night before. I had documentation of every login Reina had used, every file she'd accessed, every suspicious export. And Trent? He had signed an IP non-compete agreement when he left the company, buried deep in the original contract. They thought they were building an empire, but all they built was a case. And now I just had to press send. I didn't go to Seattle. That was the plan, distance, peace, clarity, but by the time I reached the airport parking lot, something inside me shifted. I sat in my car for over an hour, engine off, watching the planes take off above me, wondering how many of those people were running from someone like Reina. From people who smile while they're stabbing you with something you helped build. And I realized something important. I didn't want peace. I wanted accountability. So I drove back to the city. Not to the house. Never again to that house. But to a co-working space downtown where I had a contact, Jeremy, a compliance specialist and quiet friend from the early startup days. He owed me a favor. I had once helped him out of a mess with a data breach that could have ended his career. I didn't ask for anything then, but now I needed everything. We sat in a dusty conference room on the 5th floor of an old Art Deco building. I handed him the flash drive. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't vent. Just laid out the facts. What Reina had accessed. What she copied. What she passed to Trent. The contracts. The transactions. The pattern of fraud that linked my wife's betrayal with the professional theft of intellectual property I had poured years into. Jeremy didn't blink. You have them. Cold. He stayed late that night. Cross-referenced timestamps. Map data trails. Pulled metadata from her laptop backups I didn't even know existed. He even found 2 emails from Trent, masked behind a burner domain, instructing her how to extract deliverables discreetly. His exact words. It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated. By sunrise, we had a full report, formatted, time-stamped, backed by legal-grade documentation and a full asset analysis. Enough to file for breach of intellectual property and tortious interference. In other words, enough to burn everything they were building before they even signed their first client. But I wasn't done. Not yet. That morning, I sent one envelope to the firm handling their new company's business registration, anonymously, of course. Another to their first investor, whose name I pulled from a blurry photo on Reina's social media. She had posted a celebration dinner last week. The man sitting across from her was a venture capitalist named Leonard Green, known for being cautious, known for pulling out of deals at the first sign of instability. He received a full packet. 3 days later, I got confirmation Green walked. Just like that, the foundation cracked. By the end of the week, Reina called me. I didn't pick up. She texted, I need to talk to you. I think you're making a mistake. A mistake? She was unraveling. Not because she was sorry, but because she had underestimated how fragile her new world actually was. So I sent her one text. That was only the first domino. Keep watching. No threats. No vulgarity. Just a warning. She didn't reply. Not that day. Not the next. But Trent did. He showed up. Not at my door, but at Jeremy's office, red-faced and boiling with panic, demanding to know who leaked the documents. Jeremy called me mid-confrontation, held the phone up just enough for me to hear Trent yelling. This is sabotage. Someone is trying to destroy us. No, Trent. Not sabotage. Truth. But he wasn't the only one spiraling. The following morning, I got an email from Reina. Long rambling, carefully crafted but clearly unraveling between the lines. She said she regretted how things were handled, that she never intended to hurt me this way, that she missed how safe she felt with me. And then the line that sealed it. We could still fix this if you just stop all this legal nonsense and talk to me like before. Before? Before she weaponized our marriage? Before she sold off my trust, one file at a time? No, there was no before left to go back to. And now I was preparing for the after. Because there was one final piece they didn't know existed. One document, one recording, one witness they never thought would turn on them. And once I dropped that, their empire wouldn't just fall. It would never rise again. It was never just about money. That's what people like Trent and Reina never understood. Money changes hands. It disappears, reappears, gets renamed and rebranded and written off. But intentions, once exposed, can't be taken back. What they did wasn't just criminal. It was personal, a surgical betrayal wrapped in boardroom language. And I was done playing defense. It was time to end this. I didn't need an army, just one more piece. One final domino that would do what court filings and anonymous leaks couldn't. Take their faces, smiling, smug, clean, and tie them directly to the mess they made. That piece came from someone I never expected. Her name was Britta. She used to be Reina's assistant. A bright, soft-spoken woman who always stayed a few steps behind my wife at every event, holding her iPad, managing her calendar, smiling when spoken to but rarely saying a word. I hadn't thought about Britta in months, until she messaged me out of the blue, using a burner account with no name. Can we meet? I think I have something you should hear. We met in the back of a quiet tea shop in Eastbrook, a place with no cameras, no music, and too few customers to eavesdrop. She looked different, sharper, more alert, like someone who had finally stopped pretending to be invisible. She ordered nothing. She just handed me a USB stick across the table, her fingers trembling slightly. I kept this for insurance, she said, but it's not mine anymore. I asked what was on it. She looked me in the eye. Reina, talking about you, and about Colin, and about the plan. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It wasn't a vague voicemail. It was a full audio file, 37 minutes long, recorded the day before she asked me about sleeping with Colin. Britta had left her phone on record while Reina paced around her office, venting like a villain, rehearsing a monologue she couldn't wait to perform. And the things she said, they were nuclear. Lowell won't fight back. He never does. That's the thing about quiet men. They're easy to outrun. Colin doesn't know about the funding. Not all of it. But that's the point. I'm building something that's mine. Not shared. Mine. If Trent plays dumb, we'll be fine. Worst case, we use Lowell's designs, flip them just enough, and walk before he even blinks. She laughed after that one. Laughed. It took me a full hour to listen to the whole file. I had to stop 3 times just to breathe. Not because it hurt. That pain had passed. But because of how calculated it all was. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a midlife spiral. This was a project. And I had just been the prototype she used to scale it. With Jeremy's help, we cleaned up the audio, verified its metadata, and submitted it to my attorney, who promptly delivered it to the firm representing their investors. It took 48 hours for the fallout to begin. The investor pulled his capital entirely. The business registration was flagged for review. A formal injunction was placed on Trent's company for IP violation and unethical acquisition of proprietary frameworks. And Reina? She was suspended from her real estate firm, pending an internal review of financial misconduct tied to our accounts and her business transactions with Trent and Colin. It turns out using shared marital funds to finance a silent partner relationship with an unregistered tech startup violates more than just trust. The news made it to a few blogs. Nothing viral, nothing flashy, just a quiet story buried under the headlines. But it was enough. Enough to make the calls stop. Enough to make the text go silent. Enough for me to finally breathe. That night, I stood outside the house we used to call home. Not to return, not to reclaim it, but to let it go. Crisco sat beside me in the passenger seat, asleep and snoring like he'd finally settled too. I didn't need to burn the place down. I had already watched everything inside it collapse without a match. But I wasn't done just yet, because Reina had one last move she hadn't played, and it was coming. She wasn't calling anymore. She was going to show up, and what she brought with her would leave me speechless. It was late afternoon when she finally came. I heard her car before I saw her, the familiar hum of her engine pulling up the driveway like it had done 1,000 times before. Only this time, it didn't make me tense. I didn't panic. I didn't feel like prey. I felt nothing. She knocked 3 times. I opened the door slowly, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted her to feel just how heavy that space between us had become. She looked different. Not messy. Not broken. Just small. Like someone who had finally realized the control they thought they had was never real. She wasn't wearing her power heels or her saleswoman smile. Just jeans and a sweater. Like a student asking for late credit. "Can I come in?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, but you can talk." She didn't argue. She glanced down, rubbed her hands together, and said the one word I hadn't heard from her mouth since all of this began. "I'm sorry." Not dramatic. Not grand. Just honest. She confessed to everything. Not the logistics. I already knew those. But the intention. She admitted she had lost respect for me long before she betrayed me. That her own ambition had warped into entitlement. That she never thought I would leave because I was too gentle. That word, gentle, used to sound like a flaw when she said it. But now, it felt like a strength she had underestimated. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, tears forming now. "I just didn't want the last thing between us to be silence." I nodded. "Then I'll give you one final thing," I replied, and I handed her an envelope. Inside was the notarized agreement, the division of our shared assets, the transfer of the house to her name, and a letter. Not angry, not bitter, just a closing chapter. It ended with this line: "You took everything you could from me, except my peace. And that's the one thing I refuse to give up." She didn't speak after reading it. She just nodded, turned, and walked away. No hugs, no promises, no open endings. And that was the first moment I realized I didn't hate her. I just didn't need her anymore. That night, I moved into my new apartment. Smaller, yes, but lighter, brighter. The kind of space where nothing carried a shadow. I adopted a second rescue dog to keep Crisco company. I joined a writer's group. I took a contract job I actually cared about. I started sleeping again and waking up without bracing for disaster. And slowly, day by day, I rebuilt. Not in rage. Not to prove anything. Just for me. Reina would go on to rebuild too, I'm sure. Maybe with more caution. Maybe with less ego. Or maybe not. But that was no longer mine to worry about. For the first time in years, I had nothing left to lose. And that, as strange as it sounds, was the most freeing thing of all.